Thanks for that, Mary, and inspirational video to start with. And we have inspirational speakers, as you've said. We're going to open. I'm not going to give any overall themes yet. I'll try to make the connections at the end because they are quite different. But the opening speaker is Shenda Loughnane, and it's particularly apposite for everyone here at the beginning of the year to get an overview of media out there. Media, I remember the time when media was outdoor, press, radio, or television, and that was about it. Now it's an incredibly complicated landscape. And it's particularly important for smaller companies. Smaller companies as well as big companies need to know what the dimensions of that landscape, because there's huge opportunities for smaller companies. Shenda has huge experience in, she's Group MD of Dentsu Aegis network, and you're probably aware that there's about 4 or 5 global media companies. They have vast resources, they make a fortune. People in creative agencies are incredibly jealous. And remember media agencies, you know why they went off and became independent? Because they just want to have as many lunches as we had. And now look what's happened. They're 10 times as big as the creative agencies. But what it does give them is huge scale. They understand the landscape and they can explain it. They can get global trends. And Shenda has all that sort of experience. She's worked in various parts of the Dentsu empire. She's a digital media veteran, over 17 years experience in digital advertising. That probably takes you from the beginning of digital advertising. And she's here to give us an overview, not just of the landscape, but of some of the trends that are coming through. Thanks, Shenda.
I wish we were making as much money as John says. I'm going to talk to you very briefly about three trends that I think are impacting advertising and marketing today, and how it points to a need for us to focus a little bit more on brand positioning. And the first one of those is that tension that exists between short-term performance marketing and long-term brand building. And I think instinctively every business leader, and probably every single one of you marketers in this room, knows that strong brands deliver better business results. But marketing remains stubbornly focused on the short term. And in fact, 70% of the growth in advertising over the last 15 years in the UK has been driven by direct response advertising. And I guess the same is true of the Irish market. But we are beginning to see a swing back to brand. A survey done just at the end of last year established that 70% of marketers, of over 800 marketers that were surveyed globally, 70% of them said that they felt that over the past number of years, they'd focused too much on performance marketing at the expense of longer-term brand building. And you may have heard that one of the perhaps more vocal of those marketers was Adidas, who actually very publicly said towards the end of last year, and I use their words, that they were too obsessed with shiny things. And that's their terminology, that they had focused too much on activation and they had forgotten about longer-term brand building and actually developing a cohesive marketing strategy. And they're now returning to look at how they can build the long-term strength of their brand. And that's not true just for large global brands, but long-term brand building and investment in long-term also has an impact for smaller startup brands or challenger brands. This is a brand called City Pantry. They're equivalent of the, let's call it the Deliveroo of the corporate world. And City Pantry face huge competition in their sector from small startups that have technology that's broadly similar to theirs, services that are similar to theirs. And for them, brand differentiation and a long-term sustainable brand is a key differentiator in their sector. So I think one of the key things that we're going to see throughout 2020 is more and more brands starting to interrogate what is the optimal balance between investment in performance versus brand building. What does that look like in terms of my brand budgets? And some return to understanding what is the optimal balance for brands. But of course, brand building is not just about large-scale media investment. It's also about that connection between brand experience and your consumer. And every single consumer interaction, every single touch point is an opportunity to create a brand experience and to connect with consumers. And when we think about media strategies today at Dentsu Aegis Network, we're thinking not just about traditional paid media, but every single asset that a brand owns and how we can connect those assets together along with paid media to develop a really connected brand experience. And I think a really nice example of a brand who's doing that really, really well is this brand called Pip and Nut. I don't know if any of you have heard of them. They've gone from startup to household brand in a matter of about 5 years. And this is a brand that really sweats their brand assets. They really, really look at brand experiences at every opportunity. Their paid media and their social media absolutely screams their brand personality and is consistent right across every single asset that they produce. They've created a whole host of different things that connect with consumers in different ways and allow them to touch different parts of consumers' lives, from their cookbook to T-shirts to recyclable shopping bags that they produce. But I think in the last 6 to 12 months, what's really interesting and what's really critical that they've done in the brand experience space is the amount of time and effort they've invested in commerce. As you'd expect, their purchase journey is really nice, fluid, clear, personal purchase journey. And I think, as Google said earlier, thinking about how quick and easily accessible that journey is really critical. But I think more importantly, they've looked at features that shows that they really understand their consumer. So for example, they have a subscription button that allows consumers to sign up for a monthly subscription to their product, because nut butter is very good for people who do a lot of fitness, so they may want a monthly subscription. And they have a one-click purchase option, which recognizes that a lot of consumers come to their site just for that one purchase, and it needs to be as quick and seamless as possible. But perhaps even more importantly, what I love about Pip and Nut is that they're focusing not just on their own assets, but they're looking to extend that brand experience to resellers as well, recognizing that their resellers probably have even more traffic and opportunity than they have. And that same brand experience that consumers have on their site also needs to be visible on resellers' sites as well. And so it's important that as marketers, and we sometimes forget this, is that your brand experience on Tesco's online store needs to be just as good as that brand experience in store. And then lastly, when we think about experience, there's a growing move towards experience-led consumers and a desire from experience-led communication, and a desire for consumers to invest, to have more experiences rather than actually just buying products in the normal way. For Pip and Nut, that's about creating events where consumers can come, take a little bit of time out and have some headspace and do some yoga, and also experience some healthy snacks as well. So connecting with consumers in a different way. And I think we can expect to see more of that in 2020, brands combining paid media with more experience-led initiatives. Lastly, and last kind of macro trend, is what I'm calling contextual agility, and the need for brands to become more fluid and agile in their approach to capitalize on and to sometimes guard against changing tastes and groundswells that can occur quite quickly. And social media has created a situation, because of its reach and scale, where groundswells can be created almost overnight. And I think plastic straws, if you just look at them as one example of that, this tiny little plastic straw has become now almost a global and very public face of plastic waste almost overnight, and yet accounts for just 0.01% of all plastic waste, but is very much a global groundswell against plastic straws. But for brands to play in this space, you need to be very cognizant of your brand positioning and how far you can stretch your brand to play in this territory. And I think a nice example of a brand that's doing that is Intermarché in France. And Intermarché is a French supermarket, and their strategic goal is to be a champion of the access to superior products at a fair price. And that allows them to navigate quickly and easily through groundswells, as this particular piece of work shows, how they have engaged in the groundswell around reducing food waste, or to take a stand against excessive sugar in foods. And this, I think, a really interesting piece of work where they're using their own product to actually tangibly show consumers and allow them to taste the difference of reduced sugar. So essentially, each of these macro trends, I think, points to a need to focus even more on brands, to understand the relationship between your product and the consumer, and to develop a compelling proposition that is actually differentiating in your category. And that positioning can then be taken through to a manifesto that allows you to communicate your brand effectively and to tell your brand story across every consumer touchpoint. Thank you.